Now, corruption is one of the key issues many looked forward to when the president delivered his address yesterday. A research fellow with ISED, Dr. Ankamah, says the nation can make progress in the fight against corruption if only we move from a curative approach to a preventive one. Speaking on the Super Morning Show on Joy FM, Dr. Ankamah said the missing link in dealing with corruption is our inability to tackle behavioral issues.
Our approach to fighting corruption, for me, I describe it as a creative sort of approach. I think we need to also emphasize a preventative approach to fighting corruption. And what do I mean? You know, when we started in the 1980s structural rearrangement or adjustment and all that, there was this idea that we need to build institutions, very strong institutions. And if you have strong institutions, then you can really fight corruption very well. And that is true. But the way in which we have built our institutions, there is something missing in the equation. And that is, we just make laws, establish institutions, and we don't think about the behavioral issues, which are also very crucial. The people that make up the institution, because institutions are as strong as the people who make it up. And even when I talk about institutions, I'm not just talking about the formal laws which are enshrined in the various acts. I'm not just talking about the various offices set up to deal with corruption and issues of malfeasance and crime. But even the informal rules that govern our relationship on a daily basis. All right. So if we find it okay for the majority of us to give a bribe to a police officer on the street so that we can go to wherever we want to go after committing an offense, and that seems to be normal, then it's really a problem. So in fighting corruption, we need to look at how we can take advantage of character building, all right? Character building, how we can ensure that people's orientation about the society, patriotism, love for nation, all these things are well inculcated. It is that the reason why we seem not to be winning the corruption fight right from the days of the 1980s when we started building institutions is because we haven't really considered the behavioral issues, which I think are quite crucial. All right, and here I'm talking about the role that what we call social control agents have to play: the family, the church, the school.
Also contributing on the Super Morning Show, former Finance Minister said the previous NDC government reduced paper documentation and rather introduced technology to reduce corruption.
Within the public service, where because of the significant flows of government money through institutions, ministries, departments, agencies, private sector, contracts, you need to have very good systems and processes. And so I'm giving you the background for the gift miss that was launched, because you couldn't be processing almost everything that came through government in big files, in paper. The power of it. You just said you are a big fan of technology. If we had technology at our disposal, why don't we use it? And so, to summarize, not to take too much time, the first thing we focus on, and I was given that assignment as a deputy and going to be a minister, was to stop paper processing of all warrants, what you call warrants, requests for payments. We put a ceiling, the budget ceilings, which continue to be done electronically. So you couldn't, if you put a ceiling, if I allocate, let's say, 400 million to Ministry A, and I don't have a view of what they are doing, they are prone to just, going on and spending. But if electronically what we did was to put a ceiling on the 400 million, and you cannot process any warrants beyond the 400 million. And that means that you'll be more mindful about how you spend, right? So I'm saying the human element is very important. And in fact, there is a hierarchy of dealing with malfeasance in the public service. just as you would have in any, employment, situation, private sector, public sector. So there are the administrative processes, and I think the thing is for us to examine those things. So administrative processes under the Public Services Commission, Office of Head of Civil Service, have been improved, significantly. Laws have been passed. Of course, people are penalized. Now the big ones, so we also then strengthen institutions like the audit service. And what was done from the 90s,
Well, Deputy Finance Minister Kweku Kwarteng rather wants more attention to be paid to critical measures taken by the government to fight corruption.
The discussion about corruption should be about interventions to deal with corruption. If you disagree with that, you can say so. And what the president did yesterday was to list some of the things that, as a government, we have been doing to address corruption, and the additional resources we're putting into the corruption fight, the additional resources we're using to boost the work of those institutions that have been set up to address corruption. Now, I think it reflects clearly a government that has committed to fight corruption. All of us have our own concerns in respect of corruption, and of course, as a government, there would always be room for improvement, but nobody can take it away from this particular administration led by the president. The commitment, when the Special Prosecutor's Office was set up, we didn't know who it was that was going to be appointed. For me as a person, and personally I'm an anti-corruption crusader, when I heard Mr. Martin Amidu's name mentioned, I felt so proud as a member of this government, because it reflected, you were always going to ask, if a person wants to shield people engaging in corruption, will the president of that government appoint somebody like Mr. Martin Amidu? That is something we should think about, and it informs us about what goes on in the mind of the president when it comes to fighting corruption. So we have done that. The Companies Act revision to bring beneficial ownership transparency, that is when people set up businesses, who are the owners really of these businesses? Because some of the time you have people in government with access to government resources, public resources, hiding behind these companies and redirecting public funds illegitimately into private interests. Now, by making these provisions and the efforts being made at the Registrar General's Department to set up an electronic beneficial ownership register, what we're doing is to make it more difficult to hide proceeds from corruption.